Hello, welcome to Ms. Peepers Reading Corner. I'm Katrina, aka Ms. Peepers. Let's talk about books. Today's topic is book adaptations. There's a lot of debate in the bookish community about whether or not film adaptations of books are a good thing, a bad thing, always great, always terrible, always disappointing. And so I thought I would tackle that topic. Because film and writing are such different media, they each bring different strengths and weaknesses to the telling of a story. And by the way, when I say film, I'm talking about movies, but also TV shows or shorts or anything made with a camera. People who default to the book was better tend to cite the ability for an author in writing to delve into a character's inner life, their inner monologue. It's not at all weird for a book to tell you what a character is thinking, even if they don't say it out loud, and it doesn't disrupt the flow of the story at all. But in a film, while you can do this, it's a stylistic choice that doesn't make sense with every type of film, and it also can get confusing if you've got more than one or two characters that you're doing this for, unless it's a very specific purpose for that story. So you don't see it in film terribly often. People who always prefer the adaptation, in my experience at least, are usually rebelling against the book is better camp, but there are definitely some things that film can do more readily than a book can. Films can give you a visual experience that's tough to do in writing, and even a really talented author who can evoke complex imagery usually needs a lot of words to do it, and film is just faster. And there's something just viscerally appealing about watching well-done visual effects that's hard to replicate in text. If you haven't figured it out already, I just love stories, y'all. I will take them in any form, whether it's a book or a film or a TV show or a video game. There's some video games that do some spectacular storytelling. Maybe I'll make that another video. As long as the creator is really using the strengths of whatever media they choose to tell the story, you can get a fantastic experience regardless of whether you're reading or watching or playing. So I love adaptations of books when they're done well, and sometimes the book was not better. With all of that said, let me recommend some adaptations of books that I thought were particularly good. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell was a miniseries in 2015 adapted from the novel by Susanna Clarke, starring Bertie Carvel and Eddie Marzan as the two title characters. This is a gorgeous novel set in England in the 1800s and a bit in France, and it follows Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, who are both magicians. They both practice magic in a time when magic is considered to be largely theoretical, and it is established in British society that a true gentleman does not practice magic, he only studies it. Well, these two disagree, and Mr. Norrell takes Jonathan Strange on as an apprentice. There's definitely a fairy involved, played by the inimitable Mark Warren. Love him in this kind of villainous role. And I mentioned before that film can more easily evoke imagery, and that is a huge benefit of watching the miniseries version of this book. The book is gorgeously written. Susanna Clarke is very talented. And seeing those images, the magic, there's one scene when Jonathan Strange puts his hands into some sand and creates horses out of the sand to help lift up a ship that's gone aground. And you can describe it. I described it really poorly. Clarke does it better. But then seeing it in the film, it just gives you this like gut feeling. Both the book and the miniseries are fabulous. Next, another British miniseries, David Copperfield. There have been many adaptations, of course, of this book because it is a classic, and a lot of them are really good. Specifically, I'd like to recommend the 1999 TV series starring in the title role as Child David, Daniel Radcliffe, before he got his lightning scar. And this series just has so many great actors: Maggie Smith, Ian McKellen, Imelda Stanton, Bob Hoskins, Dawn French, and even Sally Field. This series just distills a pretty long and complex story down into its core components with lovely acting and just excellent storytelling. I don't think in telling this particular story, which is the life of David Copperfield from his youth, becoming an orphan and then having to make his way in the world. There's nothing flashy in terms of special effects, but I do love a good adaptation of a classic, because I think it makes people more likely to pick up the classic and read it. At the very least, it makes that story more accessible to a broader audience who may find this intimidating. Can't blame you. It's a good one that, I mean, I'm clearly still reading it. If you're looking for a classic to read, this one's solid. Next is the series Silo, which is based on the book Wool by Hugh Howey, which is actually the first book in a trilogy. I believe that a second season has been confirmed. This book is set in a distant future in which some disaster has forced humans to move underground into these massive silos. And true to dystopian fiction form, there are a few characters who are convinced that something is not right and start investigating it. And it's dystopian fiction, so it's not a spoiler to say something's not right. It would be a spoiler to tell you what's not right though, so I'm not gonna. The series stars Rebecca Ferguson as the main character, Juliet, and the cast also includes Harriet Walter, Tim Robbins, David Oyelowo, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Rashida Jones. Hugh Howey's writing is actually quite fantastic and really does evoke that claustrophobic feel of being inside a silo. If you're claustrophobic, this may not be the book for you. The book really evokes that feeling, and the adaptation just piles onto that with all of this imagery. I don't actually own a copy of this next one, so I'll put a picture here, but just a few days ago, as a matter of fact, I watched Wonka, which is the musical prequel to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. I think it got sort of mixed reviews from folks, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was beautifully done and very whimsical. This is a film that stars Timothée Chalamet in the title role, as well as Hugh Grant and all sorts of actors that you've definitely seen before if you watch anything British. Because it's a prequel, the story is actually leading up to the tale that we all know and love. And it establishes how Willy Wonka became a chocolatier. But it does not cover all the events between opening his first shop and starting to open the factory and the events of the book and the movies. And so I'm curious to see where that story will go, if it looks like it's going to be a series. My opinion may change based on what happens next, and I would be remiss in discussing this book without talking about the 1971 adaptation, which I also really, really loved, starring Gene Wilder as Willy Wonka. This story, in case you don't know, is about a chocolatier who has a magical way of making candy, and this candy has all sorts of different effects and that kind of thing. And it's a childlike adventure. What I like about Gene Wilder's adaptation is that this man is definitely not okay. This is a very sinister story that, I'll be honest, I haven't read the book since I was a kid, but from what I remember of Roald Dahl, it was probably in there too. I remember when I was a kid watching the Gene Wilder Chocolate Factory that I had to stop it. I was too young, I think, but also I picked up on something that I'm not sure kids were supposed to pick up on, which was so many danger signals. While the children who are gradually eliminated by the factory definitely fall to their own vices, clearly Willy Wonka has set this up as a massive trap. And in that way, he's not too terribly much better than the witch in the gingerbread house, in my opinion, but that's a whole separate conversation. And then after watching Wonka, my husband, Mr. Peepers, reminded me that there's a fan theory out there that the film Snowpiercer, which is also based on a book, and so I can recommend that in this video too, is a sequel to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, very specifically the Gene Wilder version. that's worth a watch. It's totally bonkers and out there, but I'm convinced. Anyway, Snowpiercer, I'll talk about that as well. Another book I don't have, but would love to get hold of at some point, is a comic book about a train. This is another dystopian fiction that takes place after a disaster has created another ice age. And so to survive, humans have all gotten into this massive train that's 1,000, I think it's 1,001 cars long. And there is the main character, played by Chris Evans in the movie, is in the back, the furthest back car, and he's working his way up to the front because he thinks something weird is going on. And spoiler, it's dystopian. Something weird is going on. Not gonna tell you what it is. It's bad. But anyway, he makes his way to the front of the train. It's a really, really good movie. It is dark. It is gritty. It's not for the faint of heart, but it's really, really good. And then finally, if you don't already think that I'm a complete nerd, here it comes. I want to recommend the Dungeons and Dragons movie, based on the Player's Handbook for Dungeons and Dragons. No joke, this movie, Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, is actually an exquisite bit of fantasy filmmaking. It stars Chris Pine and Michelle Rodriguez as adventurers, or part of an adventuring party who are trying to find his daughter, from whom he has become estranged. And it's delightful. It is bonkers. If you love D&D, you'll get all sorts of different Easter eggs that are in there, but I think it's also been streamlined enough that if you enjoy fantasy but don't necessarily know what all this stuff is in the rule book, you don't have to. And I'm saying it's an adaptation of a book. This is a book. It's a rule book, how to play this game. When Mr. Peepers and I went to see it in the theaters with some people that we play D&D with, we all connected immediately to the story and also the way that the characters deal with their challenges in a whimsical and silly sort of way, but they get the job done one way or another. They get the job done. So those are my film adaptation recommendations, and also book recommendations, because all the books that I have discussed here I do also recommend, including the D&D Player's Handbook, just because I recommend that everyone try D&D at some point, or a similar tabletop game. It's a lot of fun. But I digress. What film adaptations did you enjoy? And did you also enjoy the book? I'm definitely very curious. I'm always looking for something to watch as well as something to read. And I hope you have a great day watching, reading, or doing both at the same time. And we'll see you in the next one.